you know, there are other aspects of the story that I cannot divulge that would really set this on fire. A sense of like, oh my gosh, Marcus is a hero. Um, that I just simply cannot state, but I'm telling you, he is. Um, was he a lone runner? Absolutely not. He was evading. It's a lawful order. And if you didn't know that, well, now you do.
I'm Seth Hatena, a veteran journalist covering military and national security affairs, and this is the After Action Report. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the After Action Report. We just passed the 20th anniversary of Operation Red Wings, which is better known to the public as the story depicted in the book and film Lone Survivor. To say that there's still confusion about what happened after a small team of Navy SEALs was ambushed in the mountains of Afghanistan in 2005 is an understatement. 19 U.S. Special Operations troops lost their lives that day, and at the time, it was the worst single-day U.S. forces death toll in Operation Enduring Freedom. Today on the show, we're joined by someone who was there. Jonathan Harmon, a former U.S. Air Force pararescueman and combat rescue officer who played a pivotal role organizing the recovery and reintegration of Navy SEAL Marcus Luttrell after Operation Red Wings. Harmon not only led ISR coordination and resupply efforts, but he also helped debrief Marcus in Germany. His experience gives him a unique perspective on one of the most mythologized operations of the post 9/11 wars. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Seth.
All right, well, let's just jump right into this. Where were you when Operations Red Wings began, and how did you get involved?
I was in the Combined Air Operations Center in Al Udeid in Qatar. And I was working in the Joint Personnel Recovery Center at the con, at the helm, overwatching all personnel recovery or current operations. And I was also the reintegration, the CENTCOM reintegration team chief.
And you've led or been involved in, I think, more than 1,000 rescues. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
What, if anything, made this one different?
Well, for the special operations community, when we think of conventional rescue and how do we integrate or support special operations, there is, in those days, remember, we're still early. We had been in Iraq. This is 2005. So we've been in Iraq since 2003 and Afghanistan for about 4 years, since 2001 early. And so, we had a fairly robust satellite constellation. We had quite a few orbits for ISR, and we had a lot of mechanisms in place for the personnel recovery capability. So, our cell in the Combined Air Operations Center was front-loaded, to be able to respond with combat search and rescue capability in both theaters, or in the theater, but in both areas of operation. So for Afghanistan, we had rescue forces that were, Air Force combat search and rescue assets stationed down at Kandahar, and they were responsible for essentially the entire country. And they worked in concert with the Joint Special Operations community to be able to support them in the event that they had an event that, exceeded their capacity. So when we think of a layered approach to personnel recovery, we were the preferred mechanism in support of all assets in the theater.
And this operation exceeded their abilities?
Not initially. So what you would think of is, I think maybe a tip-off. So when we think of personnel recovery, it has 5 phases. The report, locate, support, recover, and reintegrate. So in this instance, we're talking about the initial reporting phase. And so for Operation Red Wing, We knew, that we had a special operations element that was deployed into this area, and that we had it under observation through the satellite constellation, but not direct observation in the sense of ISR. Um, and then obviously not anything, when we think of ISR, we're talking about aviation assets, air
Right.
breathing assets that would, either wittingly or unwittingly, give up at their position. So for some of these operations, depending on the amount of them, and at that time we had very few aviation assets that were capable of that in those orbits. And so they were precious, and a lot of them were chopped to high value targets. And Red Wing, to be honest, was not a high value target. What it became is something different.
Okay. So let's drill down a little bit. Take us back to June 28, 2005, the
Mhm.
date of Operation Red Wings. How did you first realize that things had gone badly wrong for Marcus and his team?
Well, what we ended up detecting was emanations in the battle space that were what you would think of like energy expenditures in the battle space that we did not expect in a location that overlapped a special operations team. So
Can
it
you
wasn't
be
a
a little more specific on that? What do you mean by energy expenditures?
Well, so we have a satellite constellation that can pick up things like ICBM launches and things like that. So, we think of detonations or launch. That constellation, that remains mostly classified. The fact that we have something like that and that we're looking for something like that is not classified. That's open source. Um, it would follow that we would have, those types of launches, there would be a profile for that. And so given an opportunity with, kind of through automation, that would be identified and then reported. Okay. So when you have you have all the pipes bent to you from communications perspective and ISR, the constellation would also be, part of that network. So those collections. So what we had was something that looked like explosions on top of a mountain where they shouldn't have been.
Hmm.
And so we collected all that, and I went over to the special operations liaison element from the combined, the JPRC, and told them, hey, I think we have you might be having an event. Um, and so they kind of discounted it. To be honest, it took a minute for them to kind of realize that we might have something here. So once I returned back, I started to develop this scenario and really try to dig in, discover exactly who's on the mountain, what their mission was, and is this something that was a one-time event, or are we looking at a troops in contact?
Wow. Um, and let me just throw their names. So it's Marcus Luttrell. He was with three other teammates, Matthew Axelson, Danny Dietz, and Lieutenant Michael Murphy were on that
Mhm.
mountain that day. We're jumping ahead in the sequence here because you didn't know Marcus's name probably at that moment. You learned it later, obviously, but the story's pretty well known to people now through the movie and the book. Um, and there's a couple of things that led to this ambush. One was their encounter with a little group of goat herders in the mountains there. What can you tell us about the team's encounter with the goat herders?
Well, I can't tell you what happened at the actual time. I can tell you what I was told by Marcus. For the audience, it's important to kind of note that when I say told by Marcus, I actually conducted his formal debriefing. So this
Right.
is like within, if we think of the chain of custody, once I had identified that we had someone on the run, and that we had we should probably kind of work through that piece. But from the goat herder perspective, let's just say that Marcus told me initially coming right out of the field that is something that Marcus wanted to impress upon me, that there was never ever a time where they debated the life of this young boy. Um, this is not the first time, and it likely will not be the last time that this type of drama plays out. I can imagine that Hollywood had their way with this story. I've never seen the movie or read his book, so I should probably just open disclaimer right here. I'm telling you from what it is that and the debriefing that occurred immediately, him being brought out of the field to Bagram Air Force Base to me, from my team to me, and then debriefing him initially for SEER, uh, and intelligence, and then bringing him to Germany and doing that long form debriefing in front of the cameras and everything with just myself, a SEER psychologist, and a SEER specialist, and one of his teammates
Right.
present.
We're going to get into SEER and
Yeah.
recovery and all the things that you do, but I just wanted to kind of give a couple of scene setters here that you do have kind of unique insight into what happened because you were one of the first ones to talk to Marcus. So, and these questions are, as you know, bubbling around for 20 years now. So, one of the other controversies is, Marcus has said that the ambush involved, in his book, he said it was 80 to 200 fighters. The official Medal of Honor documentation says 30 to 40, and other numbers show it's maybe even lower, even as low as 7. So based on what you know, what's your understanding of how large the enemy force they encountered actually was?
I would say that it is. So the answer is I don't know. We, in reconstructing the event and taking a look at the actual scene. So my pararescuemen were up on the mountain, doing the search and doing the recovery operations. So we've kind of glossed over Turbine 3-3,
Yeah.
and and the crash, and which led to the loss of that entire air crew and all the occupants on board. So we have that's how things got taken away, or that's how Air Force CSAR got involved, is because it became a CSAR event. I was contributing to the site picture, developing everything during the Red Wings event. I pulled the ISO preps, which is the, kind of, okay, who's on scene and who are we might be looking for. So I, as you kind of, mentioned, I may not have known the names immediately, but I knew them pretty shortly. I mean, probably, within minutes after or during, this event. So we're still trying to build a site picture. Do we have people that are isolated in the battle space? Okay. So then the task force flies in MH47. It gets shot down. There's a complete loss of life there. Now we're not trying to be sneaky anymore. There's a big, smoking wreck, and basically it's no longer clandestine. This is an overt rescue operation and recovery. So that's how the Air Force kind of like took over that event. And that's how I ended up going from being supporting to being supported, if that makes any sense.
Gotcha.
Okay. So the number of people on scene, I would say, I've not seen any video content. I have, and there's a reason for that, because I want to try to preserve my memory here. But I have recently learned that there is some video out there that is indicative of a much lower number. I would question the video, simply because I'd want to know its source and I'd want to know its timing. Perhaps that can be identified, but then is that video there documenting the entirety of the scene, or are we just getting a glance view? Because it may not be showing the entire scope. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I will tell you that the tactics, techniques, and procedures used in the mountains during the 2000, from early in the war to 2005, and probably deeper into the war, when it comes to mountain fighting, these individuals that we were, in combat with, they had some very unique TTPs. They would remove their dead. They would obscure their numbers, and they would purposefully try to show a smaller force, and basically to show the overwhelming skill of their ability to fight. So they may have brought 50 guys to the fight, but they may have only shown 7. I don't know. I can't tell you that specifically because there was no ISR footage of the mountain or of that event. I have heard in other podcasts people claiming that there was, and I would dispute that rather
Right.
strongly.
Okay, let's jump into that. So you directed the ISR assets. Um, what tools were available, and how did they help in the search?
So I did not have the authority to direct the ISR assets, but we could request them. So
Okay.
combat search and rescue has, when we think of like a prioritization of tasking, when a combat search and rescue event is declared, we become the number 2 national priority. Unless it's a nuclear event, basically all assets are then available to be chopped to the rescue effort. And that's almost like from a Hollywood perspective, you think of it as like a broken arrow call. Um, Now, is that how it really happens in reality? No, it's not. There are very sensitive operations that are going to continue to happen. We're not going to get that type of equipment. But if there is ISR available, when we talk about air breathing assets, yeah, they'll be reprioritized. And so that decision, we can make a request of it, but that decision is made by a 3-star. And
Gotcha.
so that's how that works. So, I don't have tasking authority, but I can ask, and I make a compelling argument.
Right, right. And you're the number 2 priority, so yeah,
Yeah,
it gets
yeah,
bumped up the
right.
list pretty
So
quickly.
the ISR wasn't available for this until the 47 went in, and just prior. So, for somebody to say, "Hey, we had eyes on," I would say, "Well, if you did, then why did we spend so much time looking for somebody that we didn't even know existed?" You know,
Right,
like
right.
it's and I will tell you how came to determine that we had somebody on the run. And that was not through ISR. That was through ComInt, Communications Intelligence. So what I did is we had, as it turns out, what I found out later in debriefing Marcus was that his antenna was broken off of his radio, and it had on infill. Not only were they compromised by the goat herder, but they also lost their crypto fills, which is not uncommon. In those days, we were using a mechanical device, and we had as difficult as it is to admit, crypto is not perfect, and especially early on, the key fills would drop just randomly.
Can you
Um,
just for the lay people in the audience, can you give a little context for what you mean by crypto? What
hmm,
these are secure communications, and there's a
yeah,
card that you insert into the radio to is that how it works?
it's not a card. There are different means by which to fill the radio with the crypto technology or the crypto key for the day, or the week, or whatever the case may be. And that transfer of data, in those days, it wasn't particularly great. And even though it did successfully transfer, you get like an indicator saying yes, it's successfully transferred. You may have a communications check, and everybody can talk to one another. But like, you know, you go on a helicopter, you fly somewhere, and you get off of it, and you do a comms check, and it all of a sudden doesn't work anymore. And
Right,
that's not uncommon. We had that happen all the time in pararescue. I ended up carrying a key, a physical key, just to be able to assure that we had connectivity, which is less than desirable, I'd say. You don't want that to fall into enemy hands.
right,
But you also want to be able to communicate, call for fire, and be able to call somebody in case you got sideways on your mission.
right. So, what kind of comms did the team have, and was there? There have been all kinds of stories about this too. There
Mhm.
were reports that they had problems with their comms and that there were training issues.
Mhm.
What was the reality? What happened? What were they
Well,
using?
so that's a great question. And I will tell you that the people that know the most are likely deceased. Marcus, the story that he told me, we went back and forth over this quite a bit. So I'm pretty certain I have this down. They had 148s and they had a SATCOM radio. Um, and the 148s that they had were programmed by their communications people. They don't, the SEALs at that time did not program their own radios.
Hmm.
And I was surprised at the level of fidelity that Marcus had in the knowledge of the different channels and the different subgroups within his radio. Typically, in my experience with an enlisted or even a junior officer, is they will really have kind of a, a cursory knowledge of the communications, kind of matrix. But Marcus demonstrated to me in the debriefing that he had a fairly significant depth of knowledge in how the radio was programmed. I will tell you, Seth, that, and for the audience as well, it was not pragmatic. So when we think of like how would an operator program his radio, that's not how they were programmed with a complete like array. So you'd have to kind of like move the switches and do the dials and
Wow.
it was not something that it was not intuitive. Then after I described to Marcus how pararescue programs their radios, he was blown away. He's like, wow, that makes it so simple. And it because it's tactile, right? Post to post, you roll the dial all the way to the end, index it. And this way you can do it in the dark, you can do it in the back of the helicopter, whatever. It's not a science project, right? And that's the difference between having a team that has had experience and those teams that are, remember this is still much very early in the war, even for SEALs. And for this team, they were a blue water team coming out of
Right.
Hawaii,
Right.
and so as a result, they didn't have, and I don't mean to disparage the men. I was inexperienced in those days, but
Right.
we had a high ops tempo. There were very few PJs. I think I was crow number 8 on the active duty side. So I deployed early and often. You had to one dwell. And so those lessons came and they came hard and we just kept rolling it over. And so this is no hit on the SEALs whatsoever. This is just part of the story arc.
Right. Right. And just to circle back on this point, in case anybody missed it, but is there any video that you ever saw of Marcus running?
Never. It couldn't exist. Not to my knowledge. And I would tell you, we had all pipes bent to us. If there, let's put it this way: when Marcus was on the run, no one knew we had someone on the run. We didn't know what we had. For all we knew, everyone on that mountain was deceased,
Mm.
including the helicopter. I was the one that actually pieced it together that we had somebody on the run. And that was done through communications intercepts. This is fragmented squelch breaking. This is not voice. This is like a radio key, in the wilderness. And having a fairly good a background in communications where I could plot an ellipse on the side of a geographic map and say, okay, how many watts, and then where is it coming from? Like we're gonna geolocate this. Like we're gonna get okay, and then we can get a grazing angle from the elevation of the asset that was picking it up, and we can
Wow.
look down the line of sight and go, okay, well, there's an ellipse here on the ground. Now, how many people were collecting on that and piecing all that together into a map? And then once I did that, I was able then to come up with something that looked like what you would say is somebody running, because we can have time over distance. When were these collected? That's all, data. And then, uh, you know, it's somebody that looks like they're running a military crest. They're not running on the top of the mountain, where it's easy, where the goat herders would run. This is not somebody running on a path. This is somebody doing a military evasion. Very, very distinctive when it comes to my from what I know, what we train special operators to do, how to evade captivity, how to evade capture. And so that's when I brought it to my leadership team, and they ended up introducing me to the Joint Task Force, and that got transmitted to Afghanistan, to the Joint Special Operations Community, and they directed that I come.
Wow.
And
that's a crazy story that you're picking up clicks on a radio and from that are able to determine that someone's on the run.
Mhm.
What's the time gap between the ambush and the time you kind of drew that ellipse and figured out there was somebody moving around in that area?
So that was all going on, and then the 47 goes in, and the game changes.
So it was pretty
So
soon after the ambush then.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have isopreps pulled. I'm looking at the identities of these people. I'm intending to, forward this on, to whomever it is. It's going to be, the team to go in and, either what we think the quick reaction force, because that's not a rescue event. When there's a surveillance and reconnaissance team that's troops in contact, that is not a personnel recovery event. That's a plus up. We're going to send additional shooters in there, and we're going to overwhelm the enemy. And then guess what? You bought it. Like, I'm
Right.
glad you brought your 50 guys to the gunfight. We're going to put a whole lot of more guns on that mountain, and
Right.
we're going to take the territory. And
Right.
that's like, from a special operations community, that's what you want. That's what you expect.
Right.
So again, no, no fault, to be conveyed here. I think that nobody anticipated that there would be, RPGs up on that mountain. And I don't think that the communications between the initial event and those that were planning the QRF, I don't know if that information got to the QRF planners. So troops in contact, if they had RPGs, that didn't get communicated to the aviation crews. It might have been important to know, and I'm certain that those aviation crews had it in their cross check, that there might be RPGs on that mountain. But I think that, given the decision to make all over again, I would imagine they would make the same one.
Yeah. It's kind of my practice when I do these podcasts is to honor the people who died on that day.
Yeah.
Um, and just for those who don't know the story, Marcus's team was ambushed. Everyone but Marcus was killed. And then a quick reaction force team of 8 Navy SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers went in on an MH-47 Turbine 33 to rescue them, and they were shot down. And if you just indulge me, I just wanted to read their names. The names of all the SEALs who perished on that day were Lieutenant Michael Murphy, Matthew Axelson, Eric Patton, Senior Chief Daniel Healy, James Suh, Danny Dietz, Chief Jack Fonten, Lieutenant Commander Eric Christensen, Jeffrey Lucas, Lieutenant Michael McGreevy Jr., and Jeffrey Taylor. And the 8 Army Night Stalkers were Staff Sergeant Seamus Gore, Chief Warrant Officer Corey Goodnature, Sergeant Kip Jacoby, Sergeant First Class Marcus Morales, Major Stephen Reich, Sergeant First Class Michael Russell, Chief Warrant Officer Chris Schirkenbach, and Master Sergeant James Ponder. Just don't feel like it does justice to the story if we don't honor them. So thanks. So, when the helicopter shot down and things transition very quickly after that moment, it becomes a full blown, what's the word? Recovery? What's the correct word?
CSAR, right? Combat Search and Rescue.
CSAR.
Mhm.
What happens next? Like, you're trying to recover anyone who survived the helicopter crash and still trying to find Marcus, right?
Yep. Yeah. So it's not just Marcus, it's everyone. Like, from a return with honor perspective, we're going to repatriate all of those remains, and we're going to try to rescue whomever it is that survived. We don't know what we have until we have boots on the ground. I believe that's when the ISR footage, it may have arrived in orbit just to look at the HLZ or spot it or whatever, for the 47s to go in. And then, of course, afterwards to see if there's any movement. And so that aspect of the mission, is where things really change, not only for the task force, but the entire theater. Like, kind of everything stops, and all eyes are focused on that. So it's, a big, kind of event. We have the task force puts its pararescueman and there were anyone who's willing to go. And so there's a whole contribution, from I think from the Marines, Rangers, Special Forces, uh, I would imagine SEALs, and pararescuemen coming from the special operations community. And if I'm not mistaken, the PJs were kind of in charge, or at least that's I may be wrong. Pararescuemen, or at that point, I think I might have been the only combat rescue officer in the theater, because there are very few of us. And so generally speaking, PJs don't take command of rescue, but they
Right.
do. It's their mission, and so like they're supported, in the ability to conduct that. But there's generally a
Yeah.
ground force commander. Okay, so I'll tell you that the recovery of we had many PJs up there. They recovered all the bodies from the crash site. We recovered two. We knew we had two missing from Red Wing. Um, with my identification that we had somebody on the run, we didn't know if we had one or two, right? So it's the same radio. So we don't know if we've got one radio and two people. We just don't know. And so as this is also one of those things was, for the American people, it's difficult to, in retrospect, 20 years later, say, well, we know everything. Well, that's not how it started. We didn't really know much. So we're piecing it together as we go, and people are making decisions with the information they have. And so bringing additional information to the fight is always helpful. Try not to be distracting from those that are making those command decisions. And so there's an ongoing operation for the recovery, and then the search. So all of that's going in at the same time that I'm putting together a support package. So we can say that like all of this looks like one thing on one side of the mountain. On the other side of the mountain is a whole other drama playing out. And from the special operations community, we have the ability to support somebody in their evasion corridor. And so I put together a map and directed the airdrop of a great number of resupply bundles that are specific for this type of scenario, for a special operations member that's on the run. I can't get into the dispersal pattern or the assets that put it in place or the contents, other than to say it's something that it would include water, maybe some ammo, maybe something to communicate with. And that's, I won't go into
Right.
any further detail. And that's designed, we would drop that, on land. We have a very different composition for dropping it in the water, but that's something that stays in reserve. And it's generally it's a very specific mechanism. And there are others.
You still don't know who's survived or if they've survived. So how do you know that these resupply packages don't fall into enemy hands? You're actually helping the enemy, right?
That's a great question. We have an answer for that. I'd be uncomfortable. Let's just say that if somebody opened up a radio and started speaking something other than English, it might be death on call. It would be a very bad day.
Be a bad idea.
It would be a very bad idea. So the concept here is we want to understand the battle space, right? We want to understand who's there. If there's still, lethal force that is, that our people are evading, that's important to know. It also is important to know if we've got if there's a partisan that could help. So there's an open channel of communication there with, somebody with a finger on a trigger or, the finger on, a radio button saying, hey, launch. So it could go a lot of different ways.
Wow.
But
So
we're
it's
building situational awareness.
it's an information gathering. I never realized that before, but it's a way of gathering information as well as resupply.
Correct. Yeah,
Fascinating.
and Americans have enormous tactical patience. It may not seem like it. In some of these events, we talk about, like,
No.
oh, well, we lost a helicopter here, we lost a helicopter there, and those have strategic consequences. But at the tactical level, when we're talking about somebody on the run, there are a great many mechanisms that we can bring to play, and we can be very patient when it comes to this. Like we don't want to negatively highlight somebody that's safe. Maybe they're hiding, right? And they just can't come out and signal.
Hmm.
There may be a time when they can. And so there's a window for that, and men are trained to do that. So remember that we might be waiting for a period of darkness before we see a strobe light. So there's a lot going on all at once, and so we can't allow people to bleed out at the crash site. We can't allow the enemy to continue to have freedom of maneuver,
Right.
and we also can't have our person that is evading or wherever it is, even if it's a friendly radio that's in the possession of the enemy. We can't allow that either. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
So that's why
Um,
it makes Marcus's this event, when we think of like the movie and the book, they can't possibly have articulated the entirety of this event and kept the national attention. You know, Seth, I'll let you know that I got a chance to meet Hal Moore, who's famous from We Were Soldiers Once and Young,
yeah.
and he gave he told us, a group of men, that he said, look, there was a war in Vietnam, and I was there, and that the actual, and that's where the similarities between my life and that movie end. you know, and I would say that's probably true for Marcus. I know a lot of people, I have heard a lot of people say, well, Marcus wrote this book, or this was movie was seen by, or promoted by Marcus, whatever. I would say that, Marcus a little bit of compassion here, because there's a heroic story to be told, and Hollywood is going to have their way with it, and so are the book publishers and everything else.
Hmm.
Um, if you are of the mindset that, hey, Marcus is feeding into this, I would also ask for some grace there, because that was the worst day of his life, and every day thereafter, he's still living with it.
Yeah.
I'm not, thanks be to God, that's not me, and it's likely not you sitting in the audience. And
Right.
so, pause right there.
Fair point. Um, while you're coordinating the rescue and search and recovery, were you in touch with the SEAL uh, talk, the Tactical Operations Center that was in
I
Bagram?
did. I called them from before I left to come to Afghanistan. I called them up because don't want to leave any loose ends.
Yeah.
So there was a report that they had made a call, and
The,
so
the,
I called.
they being the ambush team, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And so I got a hold of the men that were in the SEAL talk, and if anybody was in the SEAL talk and they're hearing this video, you talk to me. I was the guy that called you. Um, and got a chance to talk, and I want to say that he was intel. I don't think he was a SEAL, but my point is that this man that I spoke to said, I know these men, I know their voices. So that was enough for me to know that they definitively had a call from one of the teammates that was, we're in trouble, we need help. Okay, so that was a signal that said, okay, for me as a combat search and rescue guy, saying, okay, this is beyond troops in contact. This is a I need to be rescued call,
Right. Right.
right? And so that's for the audience that may sound weird, and why would we draw that line of distinction? But it's important because from a special operations community perspective, again, I'll point back to, just because we're troops in contact, that doesn't mean we need rescue. We might
Hmm.
need backup.
Right.
So when somebody makes a phone call and says, no, I need rescue and I want you now, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
And so that's what launched us into this whole, okay, I'm going to dig deeper into this.
Right. Did they tell you who made that phone call?
They had a high degree of certainty as to who made the phone call. Yeah. And that matched one of the names that I had on my ISOPREPs.
Can you say who it was?
I will. So they accredited to one of the SEALs, as I understand how the Navy has put together the medal packages, the person that I was told that made the phone call was not the individual accredited with the phone call. Now, do I know that to be a fact? Were they different people? No, I don't. In fact, when I read the medal write-up for Murphy, I, would consider the fact that the Navy had done due diligence and they had determined that in fact it was Murphy. I can't make a definitive statement as to whom it was because I'm a third party to this.
You didn't hear the call.
I did not hear the call, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't know those men's voices if I heard them. I will tell you that from a medal awards and decks perspective, at least from the Air Force perspective, we as pararescuemen and combat control and the AFSPEC war side, we endure a high degree of rigor from the Air Force before any award is awarded. And so this is not like this would be incomprehensible to have something awarded to somebody, there was even some degree of uncertainty. So, like I just defer to the Navy on that one.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's get into SEER a bit. Maybe you can just kind of set the scene here. What is SEER? Some people might have heard about it in connection with the CIA's interrogation program. And what is JPRA and what is it set up to do?
Great question. So it's important to note here that for the audience, a combat rescue officer is half SEER, half pararescue. There's two career fields that, at least during my tenure, that the combat rescue officer oversees the command. SEER stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Each one of those, as I mentioned earlier about personal recovery, those, when we think about rescue, that's the recovery phase. We talk about, how do we support somebody in captivity or on the run? That's very much a SEER thing. How do we reintegrate somebody or repatriate their remains? Those are SEER operations. And so that's why many people haven't heard about it, because generally speaking, for the most part, it's all classified.
Right.
So one could say, well, there's fieldcraft here. I should probably reel that back in. Fieldcraft being the wrong term. There is field training, right? So these men are trained. Their entire job is to train people how to survive in the wilderness, how to build a fire, how to create a shelter, how to procure water, how to overcome despair, and a myriad of other different things. How to apply camouflage, how to evade, how to navigate. Those are skills taught in the field. For those of us that didn't grow up as an Eagle Scout or, in doing any of this, you have to learn it from somewhere.
Yeah.
So this is not unique to the Air Force. All the branches of service have this to some degree. But then as we advance, and you think about, well, what is the likelihood of somebody being either parachuting in, or the special operations team getting compromised? Then we have different aspects that become more and more classified. You mentioned about the CIA. That when I say classified, we could get into that realm where we're taught how to, resist interrogation, how to mentally prepare yourself for, long-term captivity, how you would, how would you behave in captivity? What are the, I have it up here above me. What is the code of conduct?
Right.
And so from a wartime perspective, there are particular, aspects that most people don't consider. What is legal? What can you do? What you can't you do? Who can you kill, and who can't you kill? From a peacetime or governmental, that's a very different calculus. In a terrorism operation, that is a very different calculus. And so each one of those need to be identified and then taught to a specific degree. And then there's, some exercises that are done to kind of cement that into your mind and into your heart so that you're resilient as an American. What we don't want is we don't want to have our aviators or special operations guys captured and paraded out, and they are then being used as propaganda. And so that whole mechanism that comes out of we think about World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and myriad of other different kind of low intensity conflicts. We learned a lot, and so this mechanism and these people that conduct this training, that whole piece is encapsulated in the motto "Return with Honor."
Hmm. What is JPRA and how does that relate to SEER?
So the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency is kind of that capstone, right? So they are the ones that handle the doctrine, and they are the ones that also retain a lot of the information. I don't know their official charter, so I'm kind of winging this a little bit because I've never been assigned there. I've been in support. So in my mind, this is what they do. It's likely their portfolio is very large to encompass not just DoD, but have influence or provide support or subject matter expertise for other governmental agencies. Um,
Got it.
but because it's a joint versus combined or some other type of acronym. But I would imagine they do work with other governmental agencies to be able to collect lessons learned and then encapsulate that. And then those lessons learned then are fed back into an iterative training process. So like we would think of as a continuous improvement process.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
okay. Got it. And so did Marcus have SEER training before the mission?
So I just recently checked on this just to make sure that Marcus's story checked, and it did. Marcus did not have SEER training. It is unfathomable to me. When he told me that in the debriefing, I couldn't believe it.
Hmm.
It's simply because at that time, there was a capabilities versus requirements mismatch. This was not unique to the Navy. Um, the other branches of service also were having difficulties. We think about like for the Air Force perspective, we have dedicated a community and we have dedicated facilities and everything else, and this is not
Right.
new. We've been doing this for since the beginning of the Air Force, and prior to that. So the other branches of service are much larger, and their requirements are higher, and how they support those requirements is very different than the Air Force. So I don't mean to disparage the Navy here, and I don't mean to call to mind that this is a terrible event, and et cetera. I will tell you that I asked Marcus if there's a great deal that we learned here from Marcus's captivity, his evasion, his resistance in captivity, his eventual self-affected recovery, a rescue, and a myriad of other things we could get into. But I will tell you that Marcus told me I asked him, how did you know these techniques? How did you know how to do these things? And he said, well, to be honest, Friday afternoons, at the bar inside the squadron, we had old guys and they would come tell us stories. And he picked up on that. And so we think of and I want to call the audience's mind to this, culture matters. And so if your culture is one that welcomes the old guys back in, that storytelling to occur, sometimes those lessons are much more impactful than going to a course, and having somebody that you don't know train you on something and try to impress upon you how important this is
Great
versus
point.
somebody sitting right in front of you drinking a beer saying, I almost died.
This is how it is. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
So, Marcus spent several days, I think, in hiding, captivity, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
We know relatively little about what happened. What can you tell us about that time?
Well, I know, uh, what can I tell you? So I have not been through a a process to be able to speak to this openly. Um, what I can say is that Marcus, in the course of his, it's important, right, to draw a line of distinction here. Marcus was not a prisoner of war. He was not held by a foreign, entity or a foreign government. So we think of captivity. He wasn't free to go either, right? So what do we call it? Captivity is a good word. He was being held as a guest, but he couldn't leave. And so that's where we're at. He was sick. He'd been shot. He'd been blown up. And so he had some physical issues. There are some aspects of his captivity that I cannot speak to because they were so effectual that they have become a part of our playbook that we train others on how to behave. Some of these things that he did, I can speak to, like drawing a map. Um, he violated basically the big three rules, which is don't talk about sex, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. Um, he broke stereotypes in the sense of like we had this concept that no Muslim would support somebody who would be a painted man. For those of you who don't know, Marcus has a humongous seal trident tattooed across from his elbow all the way across his chest to the other side. His brother Morgan has the other side of the trident as a tattoo. So when the two men, are embracing each other, side to side, the trident is complete.
Wow.
Um, there are things that he attempted to escape twice. And because of his injuries and he was recaptured, um, that's likely not known. Uh, he had contemplating killing his captors and had, secured the means to do so, not with his rifle, but with, implements, and had elected not to do so because there was just, from his perspective, he was really conflicted. One end, they're keeping him alive, but you have to also understand that while he's in captivity, there's a significant price on his head. The Taliban have come into the village and they are negotiating for his life. And they are telling, not only are they saying, we'll give you money, but if you don't give them to us, give Marcus to us, we'll kill you, we'll kill your family and everyone else in this valley. So this is, I don't know if this is communicated in the story, but when you think about from a captive, when you're in captivity, um, this weighs on you because now it's your life. You can look back over your shoulder. And at the time, Marcus didn't know about Turban 3.3. He
Right.
had no idea. And
Right.
so this was behind him. This is in the rearview mirror. Like he didn't, and so he had no idea that this aircraft had gone in. In fact, it took us a little while to, to that it was difficult. It was a difficult messaging. Um, who wants to hear that? And I will tell you that from an Air Force perspective, if you've ever heard the story of Bat 21, ICO Hamilton, this is a very similar story where he had significant survivor skill. If you had talked to the man before he died, he would have told you, I should have just died because so many people were killed trying to rescue him. And this is one of the things that Marcus bears, not just for himself, not just for the SEAL teams, but for America. And, that type of pressure can pervert a story. It can really hurt you over
Yeah.
a very long period of time. It's toxic.
Right.
So here he is. He's faced with the very same dilemma. That is to say, everybody in this village, all these innocent people who have rendered aid and done their level best to keep me alive, are now facing death. It's a very difficult position to be in, and he knows he's compelled by orders to try and escape, to resist in captivity. And so, what do you do if you're lethal? You've been trained in hand-to-hand combat. You can kill these people, and yet they're they're struggling with a moral dilemma on what moral imperative do they have to preserve his life versus hand him over. And so at some point, he's literally in the room with the Taliban sitting across from him. And this is going on, this negotiation. And the elder, some interesting aspects here. So initially upon captivity, when he's taken to the village, he builds rapport with his captors to the point where they, like the village elder gives him his prayer beads, and the doctor gives him his hat, and then the son of the elder gives him his personal man jammies. So this is significant in the sense of like Marcus is now donning the trappings. He's being bestowed honor. And so at this point, you take your the remnant of your military uniform off and put this on. And does this indicate that you've capitulated in captivity? Or are you just trying to survive and you're doing what it is that's necessary in order to preserve your life? And so because Marcus didn't have the training, and to be honest with you, the training really wasn't even available for stuff like this. We still had Vietnam era stuff going on. So once Marcus got back and we got all this information, we had a lot to think about. And so the JPRA took all these debriefings, and they likely, a lot of the training changed.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So we have a very kind of narrow picture of what happened. It's mainly from this Newsweek article about, and in case people don't know the story, Muhammad Gulab was an Afghan timber worker. I think is one of the people who took Marcus in. But you're saying it was actually a village. It sounds like the village took him in.
Yeah, Gulab was the person that found Marcus. So when I say find, it's kind of a difficult man. Marcus was evading, and I can't really get into the details of his evasion because there were events that occurred during his evasion that I am uncomfortable with speaking about. They bring into question legalities and things like that, and for this audience, it's just it's not applicable. Let's just say that Marcus evaded. He evaded capture by an enemy force, and in the process of doing that, he ended up falling down a cliff and landing in the water. And that had a lot to do with the fact that he was dehydrated, he's disoriented. There have been some commentary based on when we initially questioned him, he didn't know where he was. He couldn't draw a map. He couldn't identify where his team was or anything. And I will speak to this specifically. There is a point in time when you experience trauma. And trauma from RPG explosions, being thrown up in the air and landing back down again, being knocked unconscious, being in a firefight, any one of these, being in an argument for most of the audience with your spouse,
Sure.
your vision shrinks. And at some point, you're looking through a soda straw. And at some point, if you get too far down this road, your memory lapses, and it becomes a gap. And that's what happened to Marcus. We, in debriefing, a technique that we use is to run a timeline back and forth. Okay, you were here, and then you were here. Do you remember what happened within? And then a lot of times, if you bring them out on a side story, they'll remember a detail. And that's exactly the techniques that we applied for Marcus to be able to put together the timeline. And this is a gap. In the sense of why couldn't he remember where that is? That's mental fog. That's the fog of war. Okay. But Marcus falling down the cliff, one of the things that he did comedically, and I mean this with all charity, is that he admitted to me, that he had lost his weapon in falling down the cliff. And here he is at drinking water because he's so thirsty that his tongue is stuck to the roof of his mouth and he's disoriented, right? And he's like, all I could think of is water. Um, so he gets in there, and then here, and he looks up, and there's Gulag, and he's got no rifle, you know. So
Wow.
he doesn't have the means to resist, really. And he
Wow.
was embarrassed because, from a SEAL's perspective, and this goes for like any warrior, you're taught that weapon is your life, and when you lose it, it it's the worst feeling in the world. I would tell you that, people might ding on him, or ding on SEALs. Right? That is not something unique to SEALs. It's not something unique to Special Forces. It's certainly not something unique to pararescue. I would say that, if you want to try to, rag on him about falling down a cliff and his weapon not being secure, you should probably understand that, like, he's literally down to the point where he's in skivvies. Like, his his uniform's been shredded, as he's been on the run, and he's, endured the shrapnel and the blast wound. So most people think of an RPG and they think, okay, well, it's all this lethal shrapnel that gets spread across, but there's a P wave, a pressure wave, that can strip your gear off, and it can cause concussion. And depending on how close you are as to how bad it is. So let's say, for example, that you're, behind a tree, and the tree takes the round, but there's a detonation that goes off. That P wave, it goes everywhere. And so in that timbered environment, this is awful. And if you don't believe me, you might want to take a look at some historical data on the Battle of the Bulge.
Right.
You know,
Let me just fill in the context there. The RPG I think you're referring to is when this is back when they were ambushed.
Mhm.
They're fighting their way out of there, and someone fires an RPG, and it knocks Marcus It knocks Marcus some distance and knocks him unconscious. Right. That's
My
kind of the
understanding is there's multiple RPG shots.
multiple. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. This is not just a single event. This is a you know, a volley of fire, that had been sustained.
Got
So
it.
Marcus, his inability to recall his evasion route of travel is inconsistent with the entire narrative of the story. That is not a outlier. That is like some indicator of something negative. That is incorrect. His inconsistency with, like maybe a timeline or things like that, is all consistent with exactly what we see when we look back over the course of hundreds of debriefs.
Got it. I'm just want to circle back to the captivity part here.
Mhm.
Um, so I just want to make sure I heard you right. There's a moment where he is sitting at a table and there's a Taliban guy,
On the floor.
and they're
Yeah.
discussing terms of his either capture, taking custody of him. Right? Is that what they're talking
Yeah,
about?
there's a negotiation, is what we've kind of come to terms with, a negotiation for his life. And so the village elder, basically says no, that, and that it was a divided room. So we're clear. One of the village elder's sons is like, no, give him over. Like, he doesn't want to die. Like, yeah, hey, old man, like, I realize your life is over, but mine is just beginning, and I have a family, like that kind of
Right.
thing. So they take Marcus out, and they, put him in a wadi. And, now Marcus doesn't speak Arabic.
Right. Or
And
Pashto,
so
or is it Pashto or
Pashto,
Dari? Or
yeah,
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 yeah. Thank you for correcting me.
yeah.
And so he doesn't speak the native language, and but he feels the gravity of what's going on, and he recognizes the enemy who's giving him the big, stink eye across the room. And he's like, this guy's coming in. He's clearly not one of them. He's not welcome, and
Right.
he's they're talking very passionately back and forth. That's Marcus's understanding of it. Um, so they put him in a wadi, and then, you know he's left. And Marcus believes at this point that he's going to be killed, assassinated. And, uh, he, is there for an extended period of time. And I would tell you that when you're in a position like that, um, your mind can really work on you,
Yeah.
especially if you don't have any training that can give you that resiliency. And maybe you, even if you were the most faithful man, when it comes to uh, a religious aspect, you would doubt. And so this is the drama that plays out with Marcus.
Mm.
And this is an unknown aspect of his captivity. But in his story, relayed back to me, and I've asked him if this is okay for me to relay. Um, he rediscovered prayer in captivity. And
Mm.
this is not uncommon either. As a man faces his death, lots of times there is the inevitable question why. After everything that had just happened to him, he's down what some might call at the foot of the cross. And so he tries to recite his childhood prayers. And he etched a cross into the side of the dirt and started to pray for the first time in I don't know how long. Um, I captured all this in the debrief because I felt like it was exceptionally important, not for a religious aspect, but for the seer value. When we think about how to come to terms with death, um, we had up until that point some terrorism events, if you recall, people being beheaded and other types of horrific things. So these would be fresh on Marcus's mind. These videos would be fresh on his mind. And so this may be the end for Marcus and, you know, his story. And so all of that is playing out in his
Mm.
heart and in his mind. I can't personally put myself in that position. I, even at the time when it was being told to me face to face, I'm a father of six, and I've had a beautiful life, so I can't imagine what that must have been like. But he ended up the next day being pulled out of the hole, and much to his surprise, he was spared. And so that put him on a path to rediscover his faith. In now today, he lives an active life of faith. It's been a journey for him, but I feel like this is an important aspect to bring forth for those of your audience who may be, of one particular, a bent versus another. There's an old axiom that says there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. I have been taken to task on that one, but I would say that like I've never met one, you know, and there is that. Uh, so Marcus is then, we kind of hurry this up and say that he ends up writing his name on a piece of paper and and giving some identifying information that he gives to a runner, and that runner brings that all the way to the closest fire base. That piece of paper gets photographed and sent to the Joint Special Operations Community compound. That piece of paper and my map correlate the exact location of Marcus, and that is what is the proof of life required to commit forces. And so we send a team in over land, and then that team endures. And if you have ever heard of it, they endure a lightning storm by which could only have been made by God. Like
Providential. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I know Travis Osborne uh, and I are friends. Travis is an 18 Delta. He was the medic who treated Marcus initially.
But a special
And then,
forces medic, right? It's a
yes,
beyond a
18
regular
Delta.
medic. Yeah.
Right. Travis and I worked together and years later. And I had absolutely no idea when I met him. So it's kind of providential again. So they basically treat him, they get him all prepped up, and they identify, hey, we are ready to go. We're ready to, we've got him, he's secure. And so we vector in the CSAR aircraft out of Kandahar to Bagram. And then on their way to Bagram, they're basically flexed on up. And there's a 3 a.m. stripped down helicopter, side of a mountain, one wheel hover transfer of Marcus from the special forces slash ranger element to the PJs. And then he's brought to Bagram, and the PJs turn him over to me.
Wow. What was his condition, physically,
He was
mentally,
sick.
when he was found?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, in which dimension do you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Physically,
Yeah.
emotionally, spiritually? Um, you know, one could say, if I were to say he were elated to have been spared, it would not be a full, it would be disingenuous.
Hmm.
The sheer degree of the weight of the deaths of everyone on him was like a millstone on him.
Hmm.
Um, People treated him like he was a hero. He didn't believe it. He was just thankful to be alive. And then the regret and everything else, it just was overwhelming. And he was sick, very sick. Um,
Had he like drunk, like was he dysentery or like what, that kind of thing? Or
a myriad of things. I can't get into some of it. Some of it's private,
yeah.
in the sense of like, what things he did in captivity, things he did in order to, um, to build rapport with his captors. This is a technique. Some of it is by being poisoned. And if you were to talk to him today, he would tell you it was he at the time he believed it would. When we talked it through, from because it was an enlisted pararescueman. Marcus Luttrell was a junior classmate of my team at the Joint Special Operations Combat Medic course. So he was not directly junior, but a couple of classes junior. So we had some commonality when it came to understanding, you know, uh, physiology, anatomy and
Okay.
physiology and treatment. And so after we kind of reconstructed what happened, it was pretty clear that he'd been poisoned. Um, you know, Whether or not it was intentional, we'll never really know, but it is highly likely. The people that gave him the water bottle and that knew exactly what it had been used for, and they made no effort to give him a clean one. So let's be clear.
Got it. And he'd been shot too, right? Or
Yes.
fragged, or yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Was he able to? Was he mobile? Like, was he ambulatory? Was he able to walk when he got out of there, or what was his?
Yeah. I really can't get into the extent of injuries and things like that because there's a field triage that occurs, treatment happens, and then really bright lights and cold steel happens back at launch stool. And the without getting into it being a HIPAA violation, like he's
Okay.
entrusted me with that,
Okay.
and I can't really get into the level of detail of his injuries and things like that. I would never
Okay.
divulge that.
Okay. I want to circle back. You said earlier, like, we returned him with honor. Can you drill down? What does that mean? Return with honor. What does that mean in your community?
Wow, it's a small term, but it means so much, especially to the men that live it. Um, Return with honor could be something like I have a relative who was lost, is a POW or MIA, and we have teams that are excavating battle sites, in Vietnam today, in Cambodia or Laos, and those remains. Here we are, all these years later, are eventually repatriated, and the body has closure. The family has closure.
Mm-hmm.
That's return with honor. That flag draped coffin being brought back, given to the family, is an aspect of it. I was on a mission where we exhumed a body out of Sadr City in the middle of the night in Iraq, and repatriated the remains of some UK members, and gave those families closure. That's return with honor. Um, for those that survive, and whether they go into captivity or not, whether they're isolated in the battle space, there is a psychological aspect that is lifelong, lifelong. Um, many don't exhibit outward signs of captivity. Some of them may be crippled. We think of, we immediately, in my mind, I go back to Hanoi, right? And all
Or
the
John
torture and things that
McCain.
went on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, those kinds of people, those POWs, that return with honor piece it's physical, it's emotional, it's moral, spiritual, and it has a more. It is not just about them. It's also their families, because when we give them back when they take their uniform off, they're still scarred and they need special care. So the families need to be briefed on what the nightmares are all about. What the sadness is, what the depression is, what the despair is, and a myriad of other different details, different medicines, different needs. And so that return with honor piece extends in a myriad of different directions. Um, it starts off with training. How do you do stress inoculation? How do you prepare somebody for torture? How do you prepare somebody for interrogation? And then when I say prepare, I mean, how do you give them the tools to fight back? And then when they fail, because inevitably they will, especially if they are there for any length of time, how do they forgive themselves?
Yeah.
And so that entire process, whether it's surviving in the wilderness or surviving in captivity, the ability to resist, the ability to escape, the ability to evade, all of that, the ability to survive after the whole war is over and you kill yourself, that's not that's not returning with honor. And so we're taking all of that into account here when we say this small slogan.
Right. What did it mean what did it mean in terms of Marcus, though?
Wow. So at the end of everything, uh, we're going to close the books on the event. We're going to close the books on the investigation. We're going to close the books on uh, the interviews. There is a scorecard, and that scorecard uh, is what gives the survivor um, an indication that they have passed the bar. That is to
Wow.
say that they have done something, no matter what. All things are accounted for, and at the end of this, they've passed. That they can return with honor.
Hmm.
They are they're a citizen of the United States.
Hmm.
They're not a traitor. They are somebody who has endured something that most people, thanks be to God, will never know.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, okay, so Marcus, you fly him back initially to Bagram, is that where he meets you?
Yep.
And you're with him you're with him back to Germany. So you're with him for several days, right?
Couple of weeks. Yeah.
A couple of weeks. What
Oh
can
yeah.
you tell us about your conversations with him and in that time period?
Well, initially, what you want to do is preserve the story. So the conversations that initially happened were, let's call home. Let's talk to somebody from a religious standpoint. Let's talk to your first sergeant. Let's get a friend of yours, somebody that knows you. Let's get
Mm-hmm.
all that together to support you, because the first few steps are really hard. They don't necessarily get easier for a while, and some people they never get easier. But uh, you know, the that's what it looks like. So you have like an initial tactical debrief. Okay, tell me the wave tops. You did this, you did that. What did you see? And this remember, when we pull Marcus out, we still haven't found Axelson. Still
That's
haven't
right.
found him,
Yeah.
right? So he still wants to stay until his teammates found. right? Because he doesn't know. He tells us that he believes everyone is dead, and because this is close quarters from his perspective, not in the sense of like the kind of terminology used for a building, but he can see. He's seen as a medic. He was the team medic, and he watched injuries occur that were incompatible with life. So, from a perspective of like a battlefield situation, if you think triage, and you're speaking to another medic, me, and you're a medic, we both
Yeah.
graduated from the same course, within months of one another. He's telling me I watched this happen, and I won't get into the detail, but for to spare the families. But he watched these woundings occur and was literally incapable of rendering aid. And there was an exchange between one of his teammates and him that said, "Go, tell our story." That that line, I understand is I think there's something that I think I've got a movie poster here that says, "Live to tell the story." That was told to me day one.
Mm.
So I'm pretty sure that happened. Like a myriad of other things that Marcus told me day one. So Marcus did a tactical debrief. He did a SEER debrief. And the SEER debrief really gets into the mechanisms that he employed. We want to understand exactly how much the enemy may know of all of the things that we have in place. And in this circumstance, there wasn't a lot for him to tell because he didn't use a lot. And we didn't want him to tell the entire story until we got him in front of a camera. Right. And so we preserved that. So he's able to do all these things, but he refused to leave Afghanistan until the ramp ceremony. And that was the ceremony where we transferred the remains onto the C-17s from Turbine 33 and his Red Wing brothers. Super difficult.
Yeah.
Again, I'll bring the audience back to a ramp ceremony, at night. Or I want to say maybe it was early morning. If I can't, it's a little hazy for me because it was like it's been a minute. But standing there, this is not my first trip to the rodeo as a PJ. This is the unfortunate side of, we always think, hey, you're out there to rescue guys. You have 1,000 rescues. Well, not everybody survived. So are they really rescues? There's a myriad of people we dignified transfer remains, right, as part of a whole operation.
Right.
It's never easy, especially when you're standing right next to the person that is the only survivor of the entire thing, the whole thing, and we still have somebody that we're missing. Now, at this point, we're really pretty certain that Axelson is deceased. This is a body search. Because there's been no activity. There's no additional signaling. There's nothing. Like we've had ISR on that mountaintop forever and ever and ever. There's nothing moving up there. There's no heat signatures. So people, I also have heard through the scuttlebutt that there's like some concept that perhaps this axe survived for an extended period of time. I find that exceptionally difficult to believe. Is it possible? Perhaps. Is it probable? No. And I think I was asked this by Marcus's spouse, and on his podcast, and I told her the answer is we don't know. But I will tell you, Seth, that and for the audience as well, if you've got ISR on there with that's the bandwidth you're looking for is a heat signature, and you're over that mountain for days at a time, anything up there, you can see a snake, we're going to see something if somebody's moving. And so for those of you that may not know the level of effort that was put into this, I will tell you with a high degree of certainty that I find it extraordinarily difficult to believe that we had somebody low crawling out there. I don't care how many trees. I will tell you, I know the PJs that were out there, which is an interesting footnote. In my entire career, 26 years, there's only one time I've ever heard a PJ say, I almost quit. That was it. That was that mission. We've been through so many different dive missions, and so many unexploded ordnance and crawling inside of burning vehicles and aircraft and stuff. Never once did I hear a pararescueman. And this is a special operations guy. This wasn't just some brand new, young PJ, but he told me personally, he pulled me aside and he said, "Sir, this is him coming off the mountain." So he comes off the helicopter, rocks across the tarmac, comes in, opens the door, and he sees me. And I said, you talk about somebody who's just completely destroyed. It doesn't take, there's no words that need to be conveyed. But I said, like, what can I get for you?
Yeah.
There's no coffee that's going to bring this back. You need a
Right.
shower and, some downtime, some sleep. And, he told me, he said, "Sir, if you'd have ordered me to climb that mountain one more time, I would have quit."
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that says, it's a volume of information in a very short sentence.
Yeah.
But that should give the kind of the audience a kind of a sense of scale of, all the men that were up on that mountain doing that rescue and recovery operations. I don't care what branch of service you were from. I would tell you, if no one has ever said anything, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for what you did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe you can't get into it. I know a little bit from my reporting that Axelson had I think a traumatic head wound and was
Yes.
found some distance away. So either and this goes to your point about the mountain, either he is traversing what is extremely difficult, steep terrain. This isn't a mountain with trails on it. This is like just
Right.
like
It's
sheer
timberland.
rock. Yeah,
It's a
timberland.
timberland and it's been timbered. So
Yeah,
you have trees that are standing and trees that are laid down.
yeah,
Um, and
and
you're
loose
talking about a
gravel,
high
and
pitch.
yeah,
Yeah, and scree and everything else. It's
scree, yeah,
awful.
yeah,
So, what is likely to have occurred is that his body was dragged
right,
to the point where even the enemy was like, "Yeah, I'm giving up."
yeah, yeah,
And that's my understanding of how things played out. Forgive me. I I wouldn't know because I wasn't there, and I know
right,
enough to say, hey, indicators are, but man, if you were the one that put hands on and what you saw is what you saw, that's your truth, brother.
yeah.
Bring it forward.
Did Marcus know about Turbine 3 when you did? Were you the one who told him about it?
I was not the one that told him about it. It's my understanding. I'm not sure if it was. I I should I don't know. Let's put it that way.
Okay,
I don't
all
know
right,
who told him.
okay. So you're in Bagram for a few days, I'm guessing, and then you go to
Yep.
Germany with him.
Yep.
Um, what and Germany is where you do the serious debriefing in front of the cameras, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you learn all this stuff about his escape and his unorthodox, by your doctrine, methods of evasion and escape. Um, uh, but there are other things. The environment, I think, is different than it was in Bagram, right? There's different people around him by this point. I think the Navy had a minder with him. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, so that team I selected, and I, also paired off all of the reception team at Landstuhl. I issued all the NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, did the briefings myself. I was supported. I was not the SEER psychologist was a full bird colonel,
Right,
and he was amazing. And then the SEER specialist that we picked up in Germany was a tech sergeant, an E6 at the time. The individual that we brought from Germany with us, that was part of his team, was a intelligence. I think he had been a SEAL and had gotten injured and reclassified into intel and was in support of the unit. Regardless, Marcus knew him very well, and we brought him with us. And so people may want to know, hey, what does it look like on the inside of kind of that type of effort? Um, Obviously, there's a facility there. It's locked down. Nobody has the ability to enter, exit. It's got security, people posted on it. I've heard stories of people coming to visit. Didn't happen. There might have been, I do recall a couple of guys coming and kind of like standing out there going, "Hey, we're here," and like, "Go away. We're busy." But internally, this particular person, this naval special warfare intelligence member, was there all night with Marcus to sleep right beside him. And the rest of us, put in long hours, 18-hour days easily. And so when we weren't there, this individual was with Marcus. And that is, again, this is supporting. What we don't want to do is have a catastrophic event occur. Um, not to say that Marcus, was that guy. He wasn't, but
Right.
there's a protocol in place, right?
Got it.
And so we learned a lot. I wrote the after action debrief for Jessica Lynch in the 507th, and some of the other POWs that had gone through launch duel at 1003 Victor, which became Iraqi Freedom. I was supposed to be on that reintegration, and we ended up pushing 2 SEER specialists up from Prince Sultan Air Base to launch duel for that operation, and I stayed back. And then they brought back all their lessons learned, and I helped them write them. So I learned a lot from what they experienced up there, and that allowed me to really see into the future what a circus this could have been. And so when I asked Marcus on the ramp in Germany, told him, I said, "Hey, here's the fork in the road. You're going to have to make it. I'm sorry, time is out. Like, I need to know, do you want to be a hero, or do you want to continue to operate?" And, in operator fashion, true operator fashion, he's like, "I want to continue to operate." And I said, "Okay." And that basically drove a completely different, a cascade of events and how we approach the reintegration. So I'll give you an idea. When we first arrived in Germany, the call volume at the switchboard at Landstuhl was over 1,000 phone calls an hour from the international press. And by the
Wow.
time that we had left, there had not been a single phone call in 24 hours. So nobody knew who Marcus was. Nobody knew where he was. And the whole time he was with us. So that's how effectual, like when we talk about return with honor, he was returned to the Navy to continue to operate.
Wow. So that's what the non-disclosure agreements are for, is just to keep that quiet.
Correct.
And he does not become a media spectacle, and people don't
Correct.
start calling his parents and all this stuff.
Correct. Yep. And a little footnote here for those of you that might, want some, comedy in all of this. When we were in Germany, I couldn't get airlift for him. There's a consternation there. Rumors are highly exaggerated that I stole a C-17. It's not true. But I stowed away a passenger on a C-17 with a 60 Minutes film crew on board. And that film crew never knew. I actually overheard them talking about, "Is that the guy? Is that the guy?" And that was only because they were ready to button up the aircraft, and I was waiting for that to happen so that I could basically sequester, probably the wrong term, but actually, get on board Marcus and the rest of us. And so Marcus went onto the flight deck and slept in the pilot's cabin, which they have bunks. And while the rest of us were in the belly of the C-17 with the film crew and some other, cats and dogs. And the aircraft commander and his co-pilot and the crew did not even know that was Marcus or anything about him. Wow. And so all these years later, if by chance, maybe they got in trouble for allowing me to do all that. I pray that didn't happen. But all these years later, thank you very much. From one airman to another, you did the right thing.
Right. It's just kind of ironic, just as a journalist, that the 60 Minutes film crew has the story of the year there, and they had no clue.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there are, I've come to learn that there are officers out there that would love to have, that kind of notoriety and be like, hey, and that could have been explosive. Uh, but I honored what Marcus was enduring,
Yeah.
and this is not my story. It's
Yeah.
his. And it's that team, and every other man that gave his life on that mountaintop.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about how we form memories and what's your kind of understanding of that. As a journalist, I'm trained, you want to get the first take, the person who was at the scene, the first witness, and that's the most accurate reading. Is that true though? Is that first read the most accurate? Is that how, or do we form memories over time?
That's a great question. And I wanted to bring up there's a podcast for the audience that may want to delve a little deeper into this. I'm kind of a Malcolm Gladwell fan, and he does this he does a podcast on Brian Williams, who was the disgraced, reporter, that claimed that he was shot down in Iraq, and there's a myriad of other things. And if you take a look at Malcolm's commentary on that, I think that'll be the most informative thing. I'm not going to do it justice. I will say that from a technical perspective, when it comes to the Department of Defense and how it views storytelling, there is a reason why there is a cadence and there is a specificity to exactly when the story is told and whom the story is told to and the training they have. Just like if you were to commit a crime, there is the initial police officers are going to have interrogative techniques, but they're not going to get the level of detail that a detective would, right? So they're very different skill sets. One is like a tactical skill set. The other one is more of a strategic skill set. Okay, so we have that in mind, and we approach the reintegration the same way. The initial debrief is going to be that wave top stuff, but then nobody is allowed to talk to them. We just shut them down, and we preserve that for the very first storytelling, because the very first storytelling is going to be in front of people that have the experience in this domain, which is SEER, right? And tactics, techniques, and procedures for that particular that operator. Maybe it's an aviator, maybe it's a pilot, right? Who's sitting beside him and is like, well, and I flipped the switch, and it's like, okay, well, which switch did you flip? Well, it was it was the flaps. Yes, it was the flaps. And so they go through that. And so there's that storytelling, the level of detail that we're able to draw from that is exceptionally finite. So when it comes to him telling his story in front of those cameras like that, it is done with a peer group. It isn't done in a confrontational kind of like interrogative techniques. This is side by side. This is show me. This is help me understand what you were feeling. So they're they're not just retelling it, they're reliving it. Now there's a reason for that. One, the intelligence value. Clear, right? Two, decompression. Decompression, what is that? It's the ability to get it all off my chest, and then there's the decompression then can lead to healing, to recovery. Because if you tell a story and then you tell the story again and you tell the story again and people are interjecting, well, did you do this? Did you do that? Well, then when they ask you that, then it is human nature. We all do this, where it's just a little lapse. We allow something to come into the story. And then now that becomes part of the narrative. And that story migrates over time. And eventually it becomes so grand that nobody can really determine what is fact from fiction. And this is not, I would say, if this has occurred with Marcus, I would say it is not unique, and it is probable, as often as he's told the story, that even and I would say this has been true. I mean, you ask a firefighter, how many fires have you fought? And they'll probably say 1,000 fires. And then you go back and document, it's like 3. Like, I don't mean to disparage firefighters here, but when it comes down to it, I mean, hey, this is a fishing thing. Like, how many fish did you catch? How big were they? and the story
Right.
just gets bigger and bigger. This is human nature. So I would ask the audience, if I don't know this to be the case, but I would imagine looking at Brian Williams and a whole bunch of other pararescuemen, combat controllers, SF guys, SEALs, you name it. I've heard it all. From guys that are jumped out of the space shuttle, with a combat knife in their mouth,
Right.
and killed the shark. So it just, people love a good story. Now, that doesn't that's that innocent side of things, but there's also a real aspect here, Seth. When somebody experiences trauma, especially like this can really migrate. This can be like, we think about this. If you were to have survived a car accident that was fatal for everyone else in the car, um, let's say, for example, you emerged from the crash unscathed.
Mm.
How long would it take for your brain to convince you that you were injured too?
Mm.
A couple tellings of the story, and the next thing you know, because your brain is trying to reconcile, you know, how is it that you survived and no one else did?
Right.
And
Right.
this is one of the things that I don't think is really well known about human nature. But it is a really incredibly difficult thing to wrestle with. And particularly, and I mentioned about Marcus rediscovering his faith. And today he's a different. I would suspect, from where he was to where he is, there's been a story arc there. Uh, but at the time of the event, he was not a faithful man, and so he had no grounding in morality in that sense.
Mm.
So without that, your whole life just becomes this cycle of up and down. And he could likely, and this is what I see with many other survivors. This is not. I keep kind of deferring back to Marcus. This is not Marcus. This is POWs. They go through extreme joy and extreme depression, and extreme
Right.
joy and extreme depression, and that cycle can be maddening for the person that you're married to, or your friends, or everyone else that knew you before this happened. And they don't understand what they're seeing, because they see a otherwise healthy person in front of them.
Mm. Mm. Wow. So just to close the circle on that initial question, the picture that you develop in that initial period, you have a process in place to kind of lock those memories in and create as detailed a picture as you can. And that's
We
what you
do
refer to as the event,
the
as what
reintegration.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then after that, they should go into they should have a handler. Somebody especially like this, where like in that. So if you're married, typically we take the spouse and we train them, right?
Wow.
If you are, and Marcus wasn't,
Right.
so, and then the branch of service then owns the responsibility for the handling. And if they're not prepared, they don't have anybody trained, they don't take it seriously, then what does that leave your survivor with? Not much.
Right.
And so there's the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency controls a lot of that training, and they're the ones that kind of understand the doctrine and things like that. But when it comes to the execution phase, that's the branches of service.
Got it. Okay. And you kind of made the point, but I just want to make sure I understand it. But there, the process of this reintegration of capturing his memories, that you control that. The Navy had no control over the narrative. That was all you. That was your team, right?
So our team documented the facts as
Yeah.
as they were coming. We also, I authored the after action. I did not sign my name to it because of a technicality, I was from CENTCOM. The operation occurred in EUCOM. And so an officer writing something from one theater to the next, not permissible.
Mm.
So the officer that was missing from this entire thing, I left my name off the top line. and provided the debrief, my writings and everything to this ear specialist. And years later, I was told that there was this guy that claimed to be me, and he
Hmm.
has apparently had some kind of a career. You're welcome. So,
That's so
you know,
bizarre.
yeah, well, it is what it is. So, you know, I the as far as what the Navy puts out, let's get into speculative territory because let's close up on what I know. Now
Yeah.
we'll talk about speculation.
Yeah.
The Navy, has they have competing requirements here, in my estimation. Because when we think about heroes, there is a need for a narrative for that. The nation's at war. The nation is working. They want heroes. This is an American thing. I think, is it? Did Marcus write a book? I doubt it, but his name is on one. You know,
Yeah.
did Marcus go and show up? For the filming of a movie and stuff? Yeah, I understand he did. But was he the one that wrote the plot line and all that stuff? Did he control Hollywood? I don't think so.
No.
I would imagine that had a lot to do with a bunch of writers and some stars, and he got a bit part in it. Congratulations. I would say that this is likely the same story that I've heard with Hal Moore, and We Were Soldiers Once. Great movie. Loved it. Is it true? Maybe. Some of it. I don't know. Maybe none of it. Who knows? But it's great entertainment. And I feel like that's a very American thing. What did the Navy do? And what I can't speak to. I would say that, you know, because I don't have any experience with it, I can't imagine what it must be like, to have, to reconcile, a aircraft crash, a compromise, a lot of caskets, and you're trying to put it all together, and summarize it. Um, we have an old saying in pararescue, or an old axiom. Basically, you're going to do things that you think deserve a medal. You're not going to get anything. And when you do get a medal that you didn't deserve, you take it, you salute smartly, and you carry on. I mean, when I mean don't deserve, it's not like you didn't earn it. But my point being is that one that you're like, man, that was an easy op. Why did I get a medal for that? And I think in charity, people look at awards and decks, and they think, well, everything is dress right dress. It's perfect, and in reality, it's likely not. I've done some because as an officer, I wrote my own men up for awards and decks, and I mentioned this earlier in the podcast that the Air Force endures a lot of rigor, and that's just our branch of service. It's
Yeah.
pilots that are reviewing ground combat medals. You know,
Right. Right.
hey, you want to hate on us? Go ahead. It just happens. I can't speak to the Army, the Marine Corps, or the Navy. I would only imagine that, I can't put myself in the place of those that were writing medals. And, and I can't put myself in the place of the families that were looking to bury their deceased and they want
Right.
something, as a memory. I'm not saying that, one beget the other. I, I have, as far as a narrative is concerned, I can only assume that you're talking about the book and the movie. Um, who wrote the book? What was it? Was it completely factual? I don't know. I don't know. I happen to have a signed copy that I haven't read, and that was given to me by Marcus along with his trident. Um, but
That
you know,
and
it,
just that's his trident on the wall there behind you. Is that?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, little known fact, in the movie, the only reason why I know this is because I saw it in the ad. But so I talked to Eric Deming about this, and I asked him, "Hey, prior to 2005, do you know any? Were you a participant of any burial at Arlington or otherwise that that SEALs put their trident in the coffin?" He goes, "No, I didn't. I've never seen that before." And I said, "Well, it may interest you to know that on the tarmac when I was sending Marcus off to Andrews Air Force Base. We were mission complete. Return with honor. Go. Go back home. Visit with your family. And I gave pararescuemen and combat rescue officers. I don't have my beret here, but we have a flash. It's a metal badge. Looks like this right here. This goes in the on the front of the beret, and this is something that we did from Vietnam on, because we didn't have berets in World War II. But when we have a deceased PJ, we take the flash off of our beret and we put on the coffin, we pound it in. And so I kind of had I asked Marcus, do you guys have this tradition? He said, no, we don't. We had never heard of it. And I said, well, okay. So I handed him mine. I had already taken it off, and I said, I'm going to give this to you. You will know which coffin to put this in and when, because you're going to attend a lot of ceremonies at Arlington. It's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And he took it. He goes, he literally said, I'll be damned. And he extended his hand, and in his hand was that trident, which was his, that he gave to me for saving his life, like putting him through all of this.
Right.
And so that pararescue tradition was passed to the SEAL teams, and at that moment. And I don't mean to try to lay claim to something so solemn. I'm glad to have shared it.
Nice. Great story. Okay. So looking back, it's been 20 years since this happened, and we're still talking about lone survivor. It's not some distant event. People are still want to know what's happened. Why do you think we're still talking about it? Is it because of the tension between the hero narrative and the complicated truth behind it? And what do you see there?
I would say that, America loves a hero. America loves controversy. I mean, we're growing as a nation. We're coming to terms with a whole lot of things, and so most recently, we're questioning what truth is, right? As a
Yeah.
nation,
Yeah.
we want transparency,
Yeah.
and so this narrative has been swept up into these other narratives that uh, you know, and so I would say that, like, there's like, because there is always, when in combat, there's always unknowns. People don't have the entire story. You could have two people observing a car accident, and they have completely different stories of what color the car was, much less who was in it. Um, and so that's why I have heard that Marcus, for at least for this aspect, has claimed a great deal of many things over time. And you've already heard my position on why that might be the case. I've not heard
Right.
it myself, so I don't know, because I don't really follow this. I kind of have a life in the sense of outside of the DoD. I'm retired. I'm an executive, and so I work for a living. and But I would say that there's a special interest item here, that it is driven by clicks. There are people
Yeah.
that want to draw attention, to kind of get more followings or things like that. I talked to Marcus about this specifically a couple of weeks ago, and he told me, because I was rather distraught. I had seen Eric's kind of exposition on this, and I was really kind of like, I really like Eric. I've had great discussions with him since then for the audience. I think there's a lot of merit to the things that he's saying, and I'm certainly a supporter of where he's trying to go with re-baselining the community, and getting back to standards. And re if it's true, the things that he's saying, then their action needs to happen. I don't know who that needs to be, but as far as how Marcus fits into all of this, I'm unsure. I would say that to me, it's tragic. You have a ever diminishing population of candidates that are capable of wearing the trident, of wearing the beret, whichever color you like.
Right.
Uh, and we have a looming war on the horizon. And I fear that we have a capabilities versus requirements mismatch. Um, and our nation needs young men and women to step into the breach. And if this is distracting you from making that choice, I would then we've lost already. And so
Mm.
if this narrative is running counter to that, if you're being discouraged, whether the narrative is on Chapman or on Luttrell, or it's a myriad of other different missions out there, then I would say that we, as podcasters, as people who have been there and have been in the breach, we're failing you.
Mm.
That's not the message that's important here. The message that's important is that there were a whole lot of men who did what was necessary, what they were asked to do, and may have had imperfect information, imperfect training, imperfect everything. And they put their lives on the line and they paid the ultimate price. And some of them lived through it. Some of them didn't. And all the other stuff that happens downstream from that, that's a distraction from what the real mission is.
Mm. Wow. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So you're still friendly with Marcus.
Mhm.
Sounds like you have a good relationship with him. This story has affected, not just the way we see Operation Red Wings, it's affected Marcus. How do you think it's affected him and how he came to see the story?
Well, I don't want to mischaracterize my relationship with Marcus. We text back and forth very infrequently, and it's not something grand. He is living his life the best that he can.
Yeah.
I don't have insight into much of it because we're not bros. That he belongs to a different community. Then our contact high, was like a few week period.
Yeah.
Um, and ever since then, like we've lived separate lives. Um, how is he doing? I will tell you that here's a couple indicators that many may not know. I heard there was some concern about, or questioning about what he's done with money or whatever. I can also tell you this, which I asked Marcus if I could divulge. Um, there is a fund that is in place for wounded special operations members to go rehabilitate in Florida. It's in a little town just outside of Pensacola called Gulf Breeze, Andrews Institute. Dr. Andrews is one of the world's leading orthopedic surgeons. He's pioneered a great many surgeries he's most famous for conducting surgery and rehabilitating some of our greatest athletes. Um, I ended up participating in that years later, and it reoriented my life and many others. Pararescuemen, combat controls, Green Berets, SEALs, and other governmental agency people. When I did the podcast with Marcus, I got a chance to come to his house in Texas, and I went through his garage on the way to the little studio that he has. Um, and I noticed a series of checks on the walls, like these big golf checks, these big, in your face checks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I asked him about it, and it turns out that Marcus is a benefactor for a great many charities. He's not known. He's an anonymous donor,
Mm.
or he is his. So, did Marcus profit from a book? Somebody gave him a check, probably. Did Marcus profit from a movie? Yeah, probably somebody gave him a check. But what did he do with the money? The truth of the matter is that he gave it away.
Mm.
That's what I know. Now, could he have lied to me? It's possible.
Yeah.
It's not probable.
Right.
When you meet a man face to face and you have the level of affection and camaraderie that we do, I tend to trust him on this one. I would say that if, I've been married 19 years now. We have 6 kids. I'm a different man today than I was when we first got married. And if you were to ask anything about me, I'd kind of want my wife beside me. I was there with Melanie and Marcus's wife,
Yeah.
and she was very candid with me on, kind of like what life is like with him. And he is living a very simple life. And there are things that we see outwardly that are different than. Did I lose you?
No, I'm still
Oh,
here. Can you hear
okay.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So they're very different. He prays every day, prays the rosary every day. He cuts grass by hand. He drives an old Ford pickup truck. He lives in a nice place that's afforded to him, by his wife and his family. But in when I think of like how could somebody be living, um, especially a Texan, he's not living a life of grandeur.
Right.
He's very blessed to be alive, and I think
Right.
that's the takeaway here.
Right. Wow. Okay. Last question for you. Um, what do you want to understand listeners to understand about the personal cost, not just of surviving, which we've talked about, but also becoming a public symbol of survival?
This is what drove the creation of Return with Honor to really codify that. Is we had a great deal of men who either survived 5 years or 7 years of captivity, only to return home and take their own lives. When we unwind that clock, that's what created the Yellow Ribbon program. Um, that's what drove its creation. That's what drove its that. And so I would say that, like, be careful, for those of us that are, kind of really, we want the facts. Just give us the facts. Be careful, because the facts are only one dimension of this story. There are other dimensions here that, there are other aspects of the story that I cannot divulge that would really set this on fire. A sense of like, oh my gosh, Marcus is a hero. Um, that I just simply cannot state, but I'm telling you, he is. Um, was he a lone runner? Absolutely not. He was evading. It's a lawful order. And if you didn't know that, well, now you do. So be careful how you judge, and be careful what you think you know, because you may not. You may be putting pressure on a community, on a man, and we are fragile. At the end of the day, we're still human beings.
Yeah.
And I would ask the audience, now that you've heard more of the story, to look at your fellow veterans, if you are a veteran, to look out amongst the first responder community with charity. Be prudent in your judgment, and be considerate, and recognize that, thanks be to God, you're not shouldering that. Because I tell you what, if you've been in combat, you have an idea of what men are shouldering. Maybe you are not, maybe you are, but we don't know how this all affects each other. We're very different in that regard. So be charitable.
Wow. Jonathan, thank you so much for walking us through that. That's a real eye opener for people who've been following the story. Thanks for being so candid.
Yeah, you're welcome. I look forward to, maybe we can come back and talk about pararescue and how awesome they are.
I'd love that. I'd love that. Thanks so much.
All righty, take care.